Hey everybody, welcome back to Leosity. This is the third installment of the Memetic disease episode, and I got to thinking about it, and I realized that I'm talking about something that I'm equating to disease, and yet diseases have symptoms. So I was thinking about this. A person who is healthy has sort of a set point in terms of their overall function. And if that set point gets disrupted somehow, they know they're sick. For example, it's possible to be hot in hot weather or in a hot room. It's possible to be cold in cold weather or a cold room. But a fever or chills is very different. It's possible to be out of breath from exercising. It's possible to it's possible to cough when your throat's irritated. But a persistent cough or wheezing from a respiratory infection feels very different. And so I was thinking, what would be a symptom of a memetic disease? What would be a sign that an idea has spread within a group of people that's bad for the group of people, but is still embedded or entrenched within that group's, God, I hate using this word, but zeitgeist. What would be an indication of that? And I've been thinking about it, and this is some soft science, guys. You can't get much softer than this. I mean, this is one person saying this based on their observations, me. No studies done. So this is some soft science, but I've been thinking about it, and I think I have a decent grasp of what would be a symptom of memetic disease. And that is when someone hears something that is fundamentally true and they have a knee-jerk reaction to it. And I'm not talking about something that affects them personally. You know, obviously people have a knee-jerk reaction when something they don't like about themselves. It's, back to the whole Jungian shadow thing. When they hear something that is an uncomfortable truth about them. Sure, doubly so for case in point would be addicts. Somebody mentioned, well, Bob, I've noticed, you're not really having fun out unless you're drinking, and then they become furious. Well, I'm talking about something that's not directly related to them. And conversely, the opposite would be an observation too, a sign of memetic disease, would be if people become elated upon hearing something that's patently false. So let's look at a few examples of what I think would absolutely constitute that. One that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and it's so funny, I don't really watch. I mean, there was a time in the, I don't know, late 90s, I guess, where I would occasionally watch The Daily Show. And for those of you who don't remember that era, it used to be a funny and quasi-informative show. I mean, the signs of decay were there. The propaganda was there. But anyway, there was there are two things I'm going to bring up about this particular show, both of which I found fascinating. The first was there was I think it was Tony Blair. There was some big time British person. Again, this was a long time ago. I can barely remember this. I was like in flipping fifth or sixth grade when this happened. I think. I don't even know that. No, you know what? It was after that. Well, after. Anyway, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. So I'm watching that show, and Jon Stewart says something to the effect of, it's a good thing that Bush isn't in charge. I mean, we almost had a king. Yeah, this was in 2008. Holy moly. He says, we almost had a king. And he said something to the effect of, and now you have a pope or something. Now, the king comment was met with raucous applause. Raucous applause. And the little jab that was then said, immediate, you could hear a pin drop. It was really interesting. And of course, this is how people are by their very nature. If he had been on a conservative show, it would have been the opposite. We would have seen the opposite play out, where everyone would have cheered over the jeer towards Obama, and they would have been very quiet and offended by the jeer at George Bush. Okay? So I'm not saying that this is an indication in and of itself of memetic disease, because that's just politics. People are always sensitive about team red or team blue, depending on whichever one they're on. But what struck me as interesting was how eager they were to cheer at the prospect of tyranny coming from a conservative, whereas how affronted they were by the prospect of tyranny coming from one of their own, whatever that means in this day and age. So that's just a segue, because that's a soft symptom. That's the softest symptom I'm going to list, because that directly affects them, right? It's their political party. Well, at another interval, there was another instance of them talking many episodes down the line. The more I'm thinking about it, the more I'm realizing none of this was in the early or the late 90s. This is all like 10 years ago. But anyway, there was an instance where one of the I can't think of his name either, but well, again, I've seen this show so sporadically. I've probably seen like 10 episodes total in my life of this show. Anyway, one of the main anchors who's happens to be black. He was talking about how great it was that Obama was elected and it was great for black people. And he says to Jon Stewart, whose real name is much longer and not Stewart at all. Stewart is a Scottish surname. He's not. He says something to the effect of, "This is the best thing that's happened to our people since we made you build the pyramids." And everyone started cheering and clapping. It was very odd. It was like, well, wait a minute. You're clapping for slavery? Because they were cheering and whistling for slavery. And and it was one of those things that I couldn't get out of my head. I kept thinking about it. And I realized now, it took a while to really figure out why they were so happy. And it's because it was a double lie. They were cheering because they were overjoyed because it was something that wasn't true. And more on that here in a little bit, a sign of memetic disease, an idea that we really, really, really want to accept, and therefore we accept even if it's bad for us, even if it's patently false. Well, we know for a fact from genetic studies that, and this is not me arguing any kind of racist viewpoint. There have been some remarkable things in sub-Saharan Africa, but not Egypt. Egypt wasn't one of them. That is a late 20th, early 21st century myth that's been propagated by producers and the hip-hop community and things like that. This whole idea of everybody descended from a pharaoh, apparently. Oops, sorry, guys. Everybody descended from a pharaoh. Dang, for some reason I can't mute it. There we go. Nonsense, first of all. And this whole idea of everybody being a king or queen is the height of just depravity, in my opinion. Because what's the point? If everybody's a king or queen, then nobody's a king or queen. It's the silliest nonsense. It's worse than everybody gets a gold medal because it's attributed in adulthood. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. And doubly so, the pyramids were not built by slaves. In fact, there's no evidence that any Jewish people were enslaved in Egypt other than Exodus. That's the only evidence for it. And we know that the pyramid was built by skilled craftsmen who were paid. So we know that. So it's a double lie. And that's where the cheering comes from. And that's also kind of soft. It's not as soft as before, but I'm going to tie it home with something that I have seen. And I've talked about this before. If someone, and I've seen this is not hypothetical. If someone is asymmetrical facially, that is to say ugly, because that's how we define beauty as symmetry. If somebody is ugly and 450 pounds, just loathsome to look at, and I don't mean that in a mean way. If you have those traits, I apologize. I don't mean that you are worthless or anything like that. I'm just saying that in terms of human attractiveness, you're on the low end of the scale by those virtues. If they, and I've seen this, if they were to write beautiful all over their body, people clap, people cheer, people are so elated to see such a thing. But if someone who's truly beautiful does the same thing, they're outraged. See how that ties in with the we made you build the pyramids, everybody cheered for slavery. You see how that ties in? Why would they become furious when a beautiful person writes beautiful on their body? And why would they clap and insist that is so true when someone who is ugly writes beautiful on their body? It makes a lot of sense if you're living in an age where, you're living in an age where insisting that a falsehood is true garners you social points in a kind of hierarchy. Well, that to me is the biggest indication of a memetic disease. And we can look at communist Russia for another great example. This was a period where people had to insist that certain things that were patently false were true, or they would be thrown in gulags. The reason why they had to insist these things was because it wasn't consistent with reality. The actual infrastructure and policies that were in place weren't consistent with reality. But if you denied their policies, then they would throw you in jail. So you had to deny reality in order to uphold their policies. Well, we are in an era now where our culture, Western culture, completely revolves around rejecting things that are observably, demonstrably true, measurably true. Whereas conversely, we are praised if we deny the truth. And I don't mean this in some sort of manifesto kind of, and I stand up for the truth, so follow me if you believe it. None of that. That's not the point that I'm trying to make. The point that I'm trying to make is that just like with a fever, being indicative, there we go, just like a fever being indicative of a physical malady, of a physical infection, a disease, I think that the more instances of a mass social agreement to deny the truth, and I'm talking about objective, measurable reality, and the knee-jerk response when it's brought up is a good indication that a culture has memetic diseases. Now, is this true for everything? Probably not. But it's definitely true for all the things that I have listed so far. For example, if somebody points out who came up with widespread circumcision in the West, which is Kellogg, if you point out that it's a cereal guy and that it had nothing to do with the scientific method and everything to do with this diluted idea of preserving vital essences like the dude from flipping Dr. Strangelove, people have a knee-jerk response to that. People get really mad if you point that out. Well, why? It's observably true, but it's something that people don't want to hear. You even see it with things that are substantially more innocuous. For example, everybody knows that Leif Erikson discovered the New World before Christopher Columbus. And in fact, there was a Chinese eunuch who also discovered the New World before Christopher Columbus. And we also know that there were people who walked across a land bridge 17,000 years ago who then populated the New World before Columbus. And yet, if you mention that he didn't discover the New World, people agree, but they're mad. They agree with you, but they're also angry. I know, I get it, I know. That's the response. But why? So I think that's a good. I think it's sort of the. What's the word? What is that term? Canary in the coal mine. I was trying to think. I was like, what's that bird they take down the coal mines? I think a canary in the coal mine for an indication that there is a abundance of memetic disorder within a culture. That is to say that there are ideas that have permeated the very foundation of how we view the world that are completely at odds with our own survival, with our own benefit. I think a good indication of that are knee-jerk responses to things that don't involve a person at all. Like in the case of the pyramids and the slaves and all that. Virtually nobody in that audience who is cheering has any direct tie to that or has any kind of benefit from accepting or denying either of those claims. And yet it's something that they wanted to be true because it ties in with how their worldview is supposed to be, and therefore they became very, very, very enthusiastic when it was spoken, when a very obvious pair of lies was spoken, and conversely, had someone made a reference to, say, the DNA results of Cleopatra, showcasing that she had physically more in common with Kathy Bates than Beyonce, well, how would they have responded then to that observable, demonstrable fact? How would they have responded? Anyway, that's all I got. It's 15 minutes in. Goodness. Like, share, subscribe, keep asking questions. Bye.